We're coming in now with the first panel discussion, the Caribbean, a Mecca for digital nomads. First of all, we have the Honorable Minister E.P. Chet Greene, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Immigration from Antigua and Barbuda. We have Professor Avinash Persaud. He's chairman or was chairman of the Regulatory Subcommittee of the UN Commission on Financial Reform, chairman of the Warwick Commission on Financial Reform, chairman of Financial Services Commission of Barbados, a member of the UK Treasury's Audit and Risk Committee, and the Pew Task Force to the US Senate Banking Committee. We also have Mr. David Cox, who is the current chairman of CANTO, who will also be on this panel. Mr. Cox is a British trained attorney who joined Cable and Wireless in September of 2013, where he currently serves as head of regulatory affairs for the Caribbean. We also have Ms. Michele Marius, a consultant and entrepreneur, thought leader of ICT Pulse. She is a technology expert, and her career path includes experience in the telecommunications and ICT fields, particularly in policy and regulation, regulatory administration, technology, and governance.
Good morning to everyone tuning, and of course, good afternoon, good evening to the global community. My name is Kirk Sookram, and I have the pleasure to moderate this session today, themed The Caribbean, a Mecca for Digital Nomads. I have an esteemed cross-sectional panel with the wealth of knowledge and experience to help us explore this theme and delve into the issues therein. On my panel, we have a policymaker, and that's the Honorable Minister E.P. Chet Greene. We have an economist, Professor Avinash Persaud. We have a representative from the operator community, Mr. David Cox. And then we have an ICT consultant, someone with knowledge and experience in the area, Ms. Michele Marius. We'll first get the perspective from the panelists, and then move into Q&As, and I look forward to probing questions from attendees. So what is a digital nomad? Is it a person working remotely? Is it a person who works all day while sipping coffee in a coffee shop? Or is it an online influencer? All of the above. Also, what opportunities do digital nomads present tourism-based economies within the Caribbean, or the entire Caribbean, for matter of fact? To answer these questions and more, I'd like to start with the Honorable Minister E.P. Chet Greene, who can inform us on Antigua and Barbuda's Nomad Digital Residence Program and the key policy perspectives therein. I turn now to the Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Moderator, and good morning to the organizers and other panelists. Quite an interesting topic, and I pretty much like the way you defined without defining who a nomad is. And you're right, it's all of the above. Because when nomads come to the Caribbean and they tweet and text and talk to those back in at their base, the impression is conveyed, or at least given, that they're on the waterfront, sipping whatever beverage of choice they may wish. But for us in Antigua Barbuda, we started a program in 2020. It was a direct response to COVID and the challenges we've had with respect of the traditional tourism industry that, you know, is the driver of Antiguan economy. It was in October of 2020 we started the program. To date, we have had quite a few thousand applications, but through the process of not only defining, but also deciding who qualifies, we have had to shortlist that and accept applicants who will fit the stringent definitions that we put in place. For example, our Nomad program is about persons coming to find a job. You must have a job that you can do remotely and perform those functions from Antigua Barbuda for the benefit of your target audience. And so we have had to make that very clear distinction between who qualifies for a Nomad program and who does not. The program, of course, is intended to bring benefits to the country. As I said, it was a creation of a response rather to the pandemic period, and they fall off in traditional tourism as we know it. Our application forms online. We have a dedicated website where persons can go and find information. The program caters to singles, to couples, to families. It allows you a 2-year visa to Antigua, Barbuda, multiple entry, of course. So one could always go back and forth between Antigua, which is now your place of work, so to speak, and your place of residence. And so it has found favor with a lot of persons. Like any other marketplace, you have to find creative advantages. And so our 2-year status may not be the same as another country. We will give you one. And it's become very, very competitive to the extent that I wouldn't call it anything but competitive information being shared or withheld, as the case might be, as the respective destinations around the world, Caribbean included, try to eke out benefits from this program. Our program attracts, for the most part, a number of Americans, Canadians, Eastern Europeans are showing an interest, Canadians. The cost is $1,500 per person for single applicant. It is $2,000 for a couple. So in that you see the scales moving already. And of course, if you go to family, of 3+, then we have a $3,000 application fee for such persons. The program continues to provide that level of support to traditional tourism. You'll appreciate also that in July and August, through the management of COVID in Antigua Barbuda, we had quite an uptake of visitors to the extent that we had our strongest July and August on record, notwithstanding the COVID pandemic conditions. That's because of how we were managing and we were able to sell Antigua Barbuda in the marketplace. So we're now using both of those tools at our disposal. The digital nomad program, attracting persons who can work remotely from Antigua. We sell it out there in the marketplace as just that. And it complements our traditional tourism product, both of which I said are right now part of the mix of our offerings to the international community.
Thank you, Minister, for giving us that perspective from Antigua and Barbuda, particularly giving us some useful information with regards to that program. Right now, I'd like to turn to Professor Avinash Persaud to give us an insight into some economic perspectives with regards to this opportunity and what he sees as ways in which there can be some monetization of it and sustainability thereafter for the Caribbean.
Thank you very much, Kirk. The minister laid out, I think, the background to the whole 12-month stamp or 24-month stamp type of tourist extremely well. So I really don't want to talk too much, add too much to that, other than say that innovation often comes about from adversity. They say adversity is a handmaiden of innovation. And it really, if you recall the background to this, it was when when our tourists had the quarantine. So tourists would typically come for a week or 2 weeks to the Caribbean. And then you're saying you may have to quarantine for a week or 2 weeks. And if you test positive, you may have to go into a hospital environment for 1 or 2 weeks. So you can imagine someone who had a week or 2 weeks of holiday was not going to do that. And so the idea in Barbados, led by our Prime Minister, was that let them come for 12 months at first instance, and 24 months in all if they wanted to. Suddenly changed the picture, because now it didn't matter if you spent the first 7 days of the first week of 52 weeks in some kind of quarantine. And it tapped into a type of tourist that we've never really had in the Caribbean, the digital nomad, the person who is not here actually to be on the beach, but to work during the morning maybe, and then spend the afternoon on the beach or something else, a fantastic work environment. And what we found, and we've had thousands of these, we call them stampers, 12-month stampers, is that it's a new market. It tends to be a younger market. It's a younger affluent market. and they spend a lot of money within the country. So the economic linkages and spillovers are fantastic. They enjoy the beach, but they also enjoy finding and discovering that bar inland somewhere, or that great restaurant, that great local restaurant. And they're not looking to necessarily find the cheapest restaurant. They're looking to spend money, and they're looking for new experiences and adventures. And they're there with the family, and they're spending a fair bit of money for 12 and 24 months. Every 12-month stamper is almost equivalent of 11 or 12 ordinary tourists. And so that means also that we may end up with a kind of tourism that has a less of an impact on our environment. We have fragile environments. If we can ultimately earn the same amount of money with less footfall, then that will be better for our environment and preserving the kinds of things that are generating us our revenues are, and make it more sustainable. So that's how it came about, and it revealed a different kind of demand that we never had before, allowed us to really tap into this market. And this market it has proved to be a very profitable market for the country and for our people. But I want to say that that this, I think, goes far beyond tourism. One of the other hats I wear is chairperson of the CARICOM Commission on the Economy. And we would say that our development model for the region is that our people are highly educated, they are professional people, and they're selling professional services down an internet connection, a broadband connection to the world. That, I think, is the development model for our citizens that makes it a better life. And in both that model and the digital nomads, the kinds of things they need is fantastic broadband. It is extremely reliable, extremely fast, and inexpensive broadband. So we need to invest in this, not just for tourism and to attract a different tourism. We need to invest in this because that is an important avenue to our longer-term development in the region. And let me also end by saying that for the regional economy to develop, we talk a lot about mobility of people, mobility of goods, mobility of money. Well, the new mode of production in the world today is data. And so we need better mobility of data. And without mobility of data, without access to data, our people are going to be held back in the development race. So for reasons of the fact that technology has changed our modes of production, for reasons related to our future development model and trajectory, how we all, not just those in the tourism sector, not just those tourism islands, how all of us in the region are going to have more developed economies where our people are earning higher incomes, demanding higher incomes from a global marketplace, as well then as tapping into new types of tourism. Broadband, investments in broadband are very vital. And that's why, let me end on this note. The negotiations currently being carried out by the CTU with our main telecoms providers on roaming and trying to reduce the costs and surprise of the costs, the sticker shock of roaming is very important for the development of our region.
And you've given us a good segue into looking at the ICT infrastructure, the telecommunications infrastructure, the impact on these broadband infrastructure as it relates to enabling or providing that platform to enable this, this initiative, this opportunity. And I'd like to turn now to Mr. David Cox, if he can give us some insights in terms of the impact on broadband infrastructure, what it means for operators, and what opportunities they see in terms of this initiative.
Well, first of all, thank you very much to the CTU for the very, very kind invitation to speak to you. Look, I think the bottom line, I adopt and support a lot of what's been said before by Professor Avinash and by the minister. What I would add is that, the Caribbean actually is doing relatively well in terms of the level of connectivity that it enjoys at the moment. There is a sort of reflexive tendency to think about the Caribbean as being way behind, metropolitan countries in terms of the levels of connectivity that we have. But in fact, if you look at CARICOM, for example, you'll see that we have quite a lot of connectivity throughout a number of our islands. There are high quality, high-speed broadband networks available, both fixed and mobile, being provided in a number of cases by multiple providers, and in some cases by a single or two providers. But that by and large, there is quite a lot of connectivity available to the region. The issue is, now, actually, before I get to some of the challenges, I should point out that there are unquestionably pockets in the region where we simply just don't have the connectivity that we should, and companies, that for example belong to CANTO are constantly looking to engage with governments to try to figure out what are some of the ways in which we can partner to solve those connectivity gaps. And there are connectivity gaps. There's no question about that. There are huge swaths in Jamaica, for example, where there are people who are unconnected, but that isn't always because the network isn't there. In many cases, actually, the network exists, but there are other deeper underlying problems as to why people aren't connected. And you might figure out what some of those reasons are. There is a reflexive assumption that everyone wants a broadband connection, or that everyone understands the value of having a broadband connection. In reality, that is the case. Research shows, and our own experience as operators shows, that there are communities where people just don't see the value of having a broadband connection. They don't see the value of having a laptop at home. They don't see the value of having a smartphone. They only want a regular 2G type phone. And they just don't see the value of having a high-speed broadband connection at home. There are issues of affordability, no question. Those issues can be addressed. And I think that with the right approach to policy, governments and operators can find the right types of solutions to help people who are unconnected get connected. And there is some best practice in the region in this area. In Dominica, for example, the networks there were largely wiped out 3 or 4 years ago as a result of, I think it was Hurricane Maria, Category 5 hurricane. And all operators are there trying to extend their networks to make sure that all of the island is covered. But there are parts of the island which remain unconnected, except by mobile broadband. And the authorities there partnered with local operators to provide a subsidy so that the operators could extend their networks into those areas that are underserved. In addition, there have been some recent moves on the behalf of some governments in the Eastern Caribbean to develop a program using universal service funds to subsidize high-speed, low-cost broadband plans for families with students who are unconnected. So there are some opportunities for partnership. But overall, I would say that by and large, the Caribbean is blessed by quality fixed and mobile networks. And so the raw resources that are required to encourage the economic dynamism that Professor Avinash was talking about is available. And I'd be proud to, and unafraid, I'll leave it there, but I know that we'll have a deeper conversation about this as the session progresses.
Thank you, Mr. Cox, and thanks for elucidating on the issues pertaining to broadband infrastructure, recognizing that there are still some access gaps and some initiatives that are being undertaken by governments to close those gaps, particularly use of a universal service fund. So to conclude with our panel discussions, I have Ms. Marius, and I believe she has some slides that she'd like to share with us as well. So if that can be brought up or made available for her. There we go. So over to you, Ms. Marius.
I think a lot of my work has been done by the previous speakers, and I just wanted to share a few thoughts. I just have 5 minutes, so I'll be just rushing through. But I just wanted to capture some points and just share a little bit of data that I was able to uncover over the last few days that may help to give some more insight into the Caribbean perspective on some of these issues, especially the technology-related issues generally. So I just want to quickly focus on 3 areas: internet access, data protection, and cybercrime. And between David and Professor Persaud, I think we have a very good insight into the state of the telecommunications infrastructure and primarily internet access. And as Professor Persaud was saying, we need to have high speed, affordable, and reliable internet services in the region. And to some degree we do. We have a broad range of plans available. In some countries you can get more than 100 megabits per second to the home. Mobile cellular coverage is good, and as David Cox indicated, sometimes the coverage can be spotty even for 4G LTE, which has been rolled out in basically all Caribbean countries. But we still have, and the whole issue about the reliability and the resilience of the network, complaints about the quality of service and whether or not we are getting what we think, the value that we think we ought to be getting for what we're paying. And clearly there is a debate that could be had around that. I just wanted to just swap out a bit of data here, because I think that we, with the digital nomads, I think there may be 2 sort of entities. Those who probably will be very mobile, as the minister was saying, you're looking for persons who have a job. Some of them might be YouTubers and influencers, and they might be out and about working on the beach and in coffee shops and so on, and may be able to access the internet that they need via the mobile broadband network. But you also may have the professional who needs to be sitting at a desk in what might be not necessarily a professional setting, but something that looks a little bit more somber based on the meetings and the engagement that they will be having. And so maybe relying a lot more on the fixed infrastructure and fixed internet. And we may find that depending on the country, matters related just to affordability come to light. So just something to consider. And not going just so quickly to data protection. And I think certainly as we know, and again, Professor Persaud made mention of the importance of data, we have countries that luckily have introduced data protection laws. They may still be a bit dated in some instances. And as we all may appreciate, the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation that was issued by the European Union, I think has become almost like a de facto standard in many countries, and especially because of the extraterritorial reach that it can have. And therefore the question as to whether or not, or the extent to which the legislation, the data protection legislation in the region is aligned, is it considered GDPR compliant, is something that we may have to consider, especially when one looks at visitors coming from Europe and those under the umbrella of the GDPR, and the fact that under GDPR, for example, data of the European Union should not find itself in countries that are not GDPR compliant. So just something to consider. And finally, just looking at cybercrime, and a lot of countries have developed cybercrime legislation over the years. However, some of it is still dated. And I think some of the concerns that I have, and I'm just going to throw up a slide that will show you at least some of what my research has found in terms of the state of the legislation. But I think one of the challenges that many countries have is that as much as they may have the legislation in place, do they have the resources to enforce it? The expertise, the equipment, the relationships outside of their jurisdiction to help them, because many times a lot of these crimes are being committed outside of the country, outside of the region, and what might be the ways in which justice could be served best. So, these I think are some of the issues we need to consider. And as you can see from this graph, the legislation varies a lot in terms of when it was promulgated. And yes, there may have been amendments since, but cybercrime has evolved so much. I mean, we often think of it as activities happening on the computer itself, but we are now very much mobile and data driven, and matters now like cyberbullying and xenophobia are now issues that are being tackled through cybercrime legislation, and the extent to which these sorts of issues are being dealt with here in the region, is still questionable. And in a context of now, when you're having international visitors coming to our shores on a longer term basis, and they may not necessarily just be, the tourists who are being guided through on a very sort of whistle-stop tour of your country, but are now, becoming almost residents for the period that they're there. Some of the sort of cultural issues, cultural norms and mores that are here in the region, but different from those outside, how are those going to be addressed? And when we look at it as it relates to what might be happening on as it relates to, cybercrime, whether or not certain sorts of behavior that we may consider acceptable, how are those being treated here? So these are some of the things that I think we may need to consider. And that basically is it for me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Marius. Thanks for tying in these key ICT issues, such as data protection and cybercrime, that all need to be considered when we're looking at fostering an environment to take advantage of this opportunity to position the Caribbean as a Mecca for digital nomads, and also to go beyond that, not just looking at digital nomads, but looking at taking advantage of what the digital economies have to offer. So now I'd like to first thank the panelists, and I see we have some time still. So I'd like to confirm if we have any questions. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions, but
Kirk, I'd like to say something about about the presentation actually.
Sure, Mr. Cox, please go ahead.
One of the things I think a lot about as somebody who's currently working with an operator who has worked in the public sector, who has been a former regulator myself, and has a background in policy, is about the disconnect, frankly, between what we say our aspirations are in the region and what we actually do. Right now, we're in a phase in the region which is, frankly, very aspirational. We have a number of governments, rightly so, saying, we think we know where we want to go. We think this is the direction that is best for us economically, to promote social justice, to promote wealth and independence and welfare for our citizens. But we are having a bit of a challenge moving beyond the aspirational, moving beyond simply wanting that to happen and putting in place the right numbers of levels of policy required in order to make that reality happen. And I think these conversations are important for us to have, precisely because they give us an opportunity to identify some of the gaps at a policy and legislative level, and also, frankly, to give us the opportunity to engage, to have a conversation between private and public sector about some of the things that are required to sort of solve the problems.
I think if I could add that those are some important words. I do think that the industry, though, and David has made some great contributions in his career across the board, but let me push back a little bit on him. The industry likes to come to us and says, can we get a tax cut? Can we get a subsidy here? The industry needs to come up with some innovations of how we can spread broadband, where the industry maybe has some different kinds of products, and suggest some policy, because the industry makes a fair bit of money in our region, and the region doesn't have, the governments are very cash strained. So how do we use this data, which is now the new mode of production? How do we make sure there's great access? Is it by the industry coming up with products on limiting the size, in which case with small packets we can get, everyone gets access? Because I think affordability is an issue for the poorest members of our society. And I think one of the reasons why they don't know why it may be benefit to them, because they haven't had the opportunity to use it because of affordability. So we would welcome the industry to develop some interesting ideas on how we could extend affordability that isn't just about us giving tax cuts and subsidies.
Right. Thank you. And in closing, I'd like to give Minister Greene just an opportunity just to give his views.
Thank you, Moderator. Again, I find a very interesting session. The timing of it is also very important to note, yes, as Caribbean countries find new ways of rebuilding economies in the face of this COVID pandemic. And so the whole question of the infrastructure required to allow for digital dimension to tourism to happen effectively and successfully is a timely discussion by you, the experts in this field. Yes, we have challenges with broadband connectivity, we have problems with affordability. And as we, as a region, promote the digital nomad programs, it's not Antigua, Barbuda only, it's the entire Caribbean. And believe you me, I expect that there'll be other countries going in that direction very soon as we see it bringing benefits. And earlier speakers spoke of the new kind of tourism, or new kind of tourists who are coming, persons who are tech savvy, persons who have the wherewithal to even make investments in the economies. Already in Antigua, we are seeing persons who came here on digital nomad program showing interest in investing in other areas, of even relocating elements of their established businesses to Antigua, Barbuda. And so, to the extent we're having this kind of interest, it means that I saw on the slide that the Caribbean has some natural attractions for this new tourism product. But at the same time, the Caribbean has certain challenges, certain gaps, certain deficiencies that need to be worked on. And I think the people who are really front and center in a regional solution are the ones who've called this very meeting together. And so as I say thanks to you for inviting me, I want to say goodbye, leaving you with an assignment of really finding solutions to this regional challenge as we recalibrate, reset the regional clock post-COVID, to have not only traditional tourism as we know it, because I believe that even after the pandemic is gone, the digital nomad concept can continue to grow, to thrive, to exist, and complement the traditional tourism as we know it. Again, the solution to that and the success of that resides in the hands of the experts in whose company I find myself this morning. And so the charge is make it happen.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you to all the panelists for giving up their time and sharing such valuable information towards the theme, the Caribbean and Mecca for digital nomads. This brings us to the end of our session, and I thank you again.